Thank you, Chris, for having me and the rest of the Virginia Tech architecture program. It's an honor to be here and an honor to be back in Blacksburg. Today I'm going to be talking about the fingerprint of creativity, blurring the lines in today's digital landscape. So as Chris just mentioned, I'm Ben. I surf, and on the side I do graphic design. That's how I like to look at it, because I like to live life to the fullest, and for me, those experiences I get from life are what influence my work in graphic design. As Chris mentioned, I do have a big social media following. This isn't, a way to get more followers, but I just wanted to throw this up here because I do have a lot of work there. So if you were interested in seeing some of that work that's not going to be shown today, I'm going to show you some of the work that's on there, but not all of it. So I know all of you probably have your phone out at this point anyways, so if you want to screen grab that and take a look at that, I'll keep that up for a few seconds.
What it's like to be known as dead. Now open up your eyes, you see the world that is red. I was the word kept in me, I think I got you thinking.
So that's just a little glimpse into the work we're going to be looking at today. So as Chris mentioned, I started off here at Virginia Tech. I know this doesn't really look like me now, obviously, but this was me freshman year. And the deal was with my parents that if I got into architecture school, because I started off in just general education, non-declared major, and I really wanted to get into architecture school, but I honestly didn't even apply for architecture school before I got here. I applied for engineering and didn't get in, so I joined the Corps of Cadets and worked that entire freshman year to get into architecture school, and the deal was with my parents that if I got in that I could leave the Corps of Cadets. So that's kind of what happened, and that's why I look like this today and not the other way around. So once I got into the summer studio, this is a look at my desk at the end of the year. You can see a lot of physical things on the desk, a lot of digital things, but one thing I'm here to say to you today is after graduating 8 years ago, I realized what great resources this school has, especially all the labs, the things you can do by hand. There's a screen printing lab, the wood shop, the metal shop. I'm assuming all that's still there. Really, you're just now coming in. I guess most of you are just a few weeks here. So really don't take that for granted. Take as much advantage of that as possible. You'll always have your computer. You'll always have your phone. But you most likely will not have all those resources that are presented to you at this school. And that's probably the greatest asset that I had when I was here, is just learning how to do all those things that I probably would have never had the opportunity to do. And people always ask me why I went to architecture school and then now do graphic design. Well, I think through all these resources that are at the school, I learned so much more about design that I would have in graphic design school or anything like that. So if I could go back and do architecture school all over again and use those resources and learn the things I did about design and just have that hands-on experience through the labs, I would do it all over again tenfold. So I just really wanted to make that a point today to tell you guys, do not take that for granted. Get in those labs and get your hands dirty as much as possible, because once you graduate, you have to start paying for those things, and you have to really start to reach to get your hands on those type of resources. So this is me. This is my thesis work. I was in architecture school from 2013 to 2017. These are some of the sketches I did. I think this is a fourth year project in Heiner Studio. And you can see I really like to develop my process from the hand, from sketches first. Having that connection from the pen to the paper is really important, not just going, you can get inspiration online, but I really think the connection is made through the process, through that connection of hand and paper. And then once you have that connection, you can go into the digital world and kind of start to apply those things that you have in your head into that space. So this was actually drawn by hand. All the technical details are drawn by hand and then Photoshop afterwards. I believe this is probably one of the first things I Photoshopped in fourth year. This was a project I did in Patrick's studio, and I'm sure Patrick's familiar with this model on the right because I think it probably weighed half a ton, and I think it sat in his studio. So I came back for a football game a couple years later, and Patrick texted me and asked me to come by the studio and get rid of it because he's tired of looking at it in the corner, because it was sitting there for a couple years, if I'm not mistaken.
It was beautiful. The gift they kept on giving.
Oh yeah, but we got some good photographs out of it. But I think the prompt here was to make an architectural connection, which I was talking to some of the students in Chris's studio today about this, how making that connection between two different materials, how it can be a beautiful thing. But really you need to get your hands dirty and draw that out and make physical things. So this is some thesis work. Again, playing with that, the interplay of analog and digital here. So the left is Photoshop and the right is hand-drawn collage. Some more sketches here, just to give you some context. I believe this is the drawing Chris was referring to. These are all done by hand. I think the drawing on the left took me maybe 2 or 3 weeks of studio time. That was my initial thesis sketch, or drawing rather, about my ideas. And this is kind of where I was interested in the graphic side of things. I really love the structure of architecture and how it can take you places through that rigidity and the grid system. But I really like to explore that in ways that weren't realistic or technically possible, and trying to make those things a reality that you thought might be impossible, but let's figure out a way to do it. So more thesis drawing there. These are a few screen printing exercises from Chris's screen printing lab. The one on the left is just one layer, and then the right is all those different. I think the project that year was to just, we had one poster going the whole year, right? And we just layered and layered and layered. After I graduated, I decided not to go into the practice of architecture. And once COVID hit, I really decided to buckle down and learn how to do typography because I wanted to get into graphic design. I decided that year during COVID at my 9 to 5 that I would make a poster every day and post it on Instagram for 365 days. So I was working from 6 to 6, and on my lunch breaks or whatever, I would just make a poster and just quicker iterations just to get it out. Through that process, I was able to, luckily, and I'm fortunate enough to gain followers, and as I was building my portfolio, people were reaching out to me asking me for work. And fast forward to now, I use Instagram primarily as a source, as a tool to post my work, and people reach out there and hire me from there, from musicians to other design studios. But if you use Instagram, not as a personal matter, but as a tool to put your work out there, great things could happen that were unexpected. I never thought that posting those 365 posters that I would become a freelancer, but it kind of just gradually happened. So you have to put the work out there, you have to do the work to make things happen. So finding your fingerprint. So your fingerprint is that invisible thread running through all your work. It's a sum of your choices, your influences, your experiences. It's what makes your work yours. Some people might say this is style, but I would concur that your style has to be worked through the creative process. You have to create, but your fingerprint is within you. It's everything that you've experienced in life. You just have to tease that out through the creative process. But everyone here, sitting here, has their obviously individual fingerprint, but this is more metaphoric for, what's inside of you, your experiences that can come out in the creative process. And Rick Rubin says, look for what you notice, but no one else sees. So again, you all have your own lens. Everyone perceives life differently. Find what you notice and really expand on that, and great things can happen for you. So what interests you in your mind? Photos, fashion, traveling, experiences, music, art, all these things you should be going out and experiencing. You should definitely be in the studio working towards your practice, but you should also, have hobbies, go running, exercise. All these things are going to influence how you bring that work back into the studio If you think of it as if you're a piece of technology, if you don't apply these updates to your life, if you don't go out there and get these updates, you're just going to be the same. But you need to really go through those experiences. So those are just some of my hobbies and things that I do to stay fresh and stay creative. Also, don't be so obsessed with the end result that you miss the process. In today's world, and I can't stress this enough, everyone in industry and everything is so hyper-focused on the end result. We're moving so fast with technology that a new iPhone comes out every year and got to get the new iPhone or what have you. We're just so obsessed with the end result, and especially as designers, I think we're always thinking about how we can make this thing and how we can make it good, but we want to get to that point, but we don't think about how we get to that point. And how we get to that point is really important. If we're using certain tools, you could be skipping over things that you might miss doing things a different way, again, looking at things through that different lens. Your fingerprint is that one thing no one else can replicate. Tools change, AI evolves, trends come and go, but the human behind the art, that's your DNA. Your fingerprint also lives in the balance. So in the analog world, when you're doing things and connecting with your hand and with your touch, that grounds your fingerprint, that establishes yourself. Digital tools and things, that can amplify it, that can help you, but you have to remember at the end of the day, that is a tool. It can help you, like, for me, example, Instagram, that has helped me in my life, but I wouldn't say that Instagram is the only thing that I use. So if you lose the balance of one of these things, the fingerprint fades away and you start to lose that sense of yourself. So if you're strictly working on the computer and doing everything digital, you're going to lose that sense of your fingerprint. If you're doing everything by hand, of course, this is 2025, we have to be somewhat digitally inclined or we're going to kind of get left behind. So there needs to be a balance there of working analog and digitally. And again, like I mentioned before, your style is developed from your fingerprint through the act of creation, creating over and over and over and over again. So you will develop your style the more you create. You just have to do the work, the process. Style is not developed by just making something and having it look a certain way. You have to develop that style over time, and it's up to you and only you to develop that style. So this is a poster I made just to emphasize that. If at first you don't succeed, try and try and try again and again and again. So analog. Analog exists in the real life, tangible material. All of us are innately analog. We exist in the real world. We're not robots, we're not AI, we all exist. This is me when I was a kid playing with Play-Doh, existing in the analog world. When we work by hand, imperfection is inevitable, and that's the beauty of it. Each flaw is unique, impossible to replicate, and undeniably human. Those imperfections are what give the work its soul, allowing it to speak more deeply to other humans. So that was just a little insight into my process with the analog material. So again, Rick Rubin says, flaws are human, and the attraction of the art is the humanity held in it. If we were machine-like, the art wouldn't resonate. It would be soulless. With life comes pain, insecurity, and fear. We're all different, and we're all imperfect. And the imperfections are what makes each one of us and our work interesting. So these mistakes, these things that come out of your fingerprint are what makes the work interesting. If we fast forward to just the end result as fast as we can, the cheapest way we can, the fastest way we can, we're going to miss a lot of those mistakes. And the digital world does not help that at all, at least right now. So this is me in Rome. I went around and ripped off some of the wheat paste that were on the wall, and I thought it was super interesting to have these wheat paste materials and make artwork in that place. So again, experiencing that place and the culture and the textures and the place and making art from it. I think that's super interesting. So these are a couple of the collages I made from that. And you can still see architecture is always going to influence my artwork and graphics that I make today. I'll always have it embedded in my soul because I'm super interested in it. These are a few of the just free found artworks that I saw in Rome that year. So you can see all these artworks have a certain soul to them. AI or digital means could never replicate this. This is free art on the street that people just wheat paste over, rip off, wheat paste over, rip off. If you guys don't know, wheat pasting is just basically graffiti with posters. And what was super cool to me was I went to Rome to look at all this art and beautiful architecture, and what stood out to me the most was all this basically trash that was graffitied up on the walls. So now we'll get into some of my work. Again, taking those ideas of analog. So these next couple works are all made by hand after graduation, just again, personal work. This is a collage I did of the surfer Jerry Lopez. Again, just turning out the analog material and using my hands for creation, and no end result really in my mind, just the act of creation and seeing what comes of it. So this is a typewriter. You type and you can smudge the words there in the middle. Again, this is work I did from a scanner, so not necessarily all analog. I did use a scanner for these, but mostly just analog and scanning and doing things by hand using a little bit of that technology. This is a photograph I've taken and just cut up some pieces and collage them together. And what's super interesting to me as a graphic designer is, I think David Carson says, just because it's legible doesn't mean it communicates. I think for graphic design, typography for me is the vehicle of the exploration. So if you relate it to architecture, it's a foundation, and what you do with that typography can either be really boring or you can turn it into something that communicates. You, of course, want it to be legible in a certain sense, but you want the typography to communicate and invoke a feeling other than what the word says. So these are an attempt to kind of do that, and just by analog. So here we're stretching the type. In surfing, this is called a soul arch, so I really want to emphasize that with the typography of how we can arch the type. These here were created with a bunch of layers, so I printed off the letter K multiple times, I think like 10, 20 times, and then I printed them out on vellum, like transparent paper, and overlaid those on top of each other to get these results. Same thing with the G. But as you can see, these two were made exactly the same way. If you were to write it on paper, I did the exact same thing, but the results are wildly different because you're running it through that process of hand and through your style and through your fingerprint. And if you did that with technology, it would probably give you the exact same result with just a different letter. But these are, again, I want to invoke a certain feeling with the typography here that's not just the letter G. You get a raw emotion from that feeling. you understand that a human made this and it has depth and meaning to it other than the letter G. Because the letter G is boring, like who wants to look at a letter G? But when you add that human touch to it, it becomes a lot more evocative and you want to know more about it. So these are more some of the recent things I do, and you can start to see a little bit of the architecture influence in these and the diagrams and the physics diagrams and certain things that are embedded into these. And again, I try my best to tell a story with the artwork, with the details. You can see all the little details in there. I think that is a thing that has come from architecture school as well, is just really being hyper-focused on those details and how minor details on their own don't stand out, but as you build those up, it starts to tell a story in itself and starts to add depth and layering that you wouldn't really have if this was just, a generic, three-piece image. But the more texture and the more details you add in that, it just becomes more personable, and especially when you're adding layers of the human touch. So this is a poster I did for Nike and Tiger Woods. And again, you can start to see how I like to use these elements that start to tell the story of how the poster was made. So instead of just having Tiger Woods swing the club, I want to show how that works on a physics level. It might not all really make sense, but you can start to grasp how it might go together and how the poster might be made. That's one thing I really try to do is like, I don't want you to see the poster and know exactly how it's made. I want you to look at the poster and think on how that was made and how that was achieved, and give little hints and clues through the details of how that was possible. So again, kind of the same thing there. All right, let's talk about digital. Digital, as an overarching statement, is a powerful tool that exists outside of ourselves. It's a way to edit our fingerprint. So emphasis on the tool. Digital is a tool. So this is my probably first experience with my aunt's laptop. I'm sure probably none of you have worked on a laptop that looks like that.
What does this button do?
So in the digital world, perfection is easy, but pixels alone are flat. The computer is only a tool, and when everyone relies and uses the same tool exactly the same way, the work universally becomes boring and repetitive. So as we progress as digital tools progress, they're getting easier and easier to use and more user-friendly, but me and Chris were actually just talking about this. They're so user-friendly, we don't even know how they operate, know how they work. And when everyone is just kind of chugging and plugging, using the same tools for the same way, you see it on Instagram and Pinterest and universally, even through architecture, I think, that everything starts to kind of look the same and blend in because we're all using the same exact tool, completely skipping over your fingerprint almost, and just to produce a final result. So, when people are using the same tool like that, obviously all the work is going to look the same. But if you go back to that analog stuff, the process, how you mix in your personal fingerprint with that, that's where the digital can become an asset. But when we're using it as the main tool to create, that's when everything is going to start to look the same and repetitive, because the person next to you, across from you, in the other studio, they have the exact same tool that does the exact same thing. So the less input we have in that from our own fingerprint, the more it's going to look just similar as the person sitting next to you. And as I said, however, digital tools give us the option such as infinite layers, allowing us to create in ways that are not possible by hand. So on the flip side of that, I'm not going to sit here and trash digital. There's definitely uses to digital, but to me, you have to look at it in a way that you have to understand it first, and then you have to look at it in a way that other people aren't necessarily using it for what it's used for. That's how I look at digital. It's not just use it how it's designed for. It's looking outside the box and figuring out ways to use the digital that no one else is doing. It goes back to that Rick Rubin quote of see what other people can't see and go with that. So I had an idea. Digital tools aren't just about recreating what we can do by hand. They're about opening doors to experiments that the analog world simply can't support, letting us layer, sample, and transform entirely new ways. So as I have worked on these things, I started with the analog, I've worked with the digital, and I thought, what are some ways that I can make things 100% digitally that are just completely out of the box and not basically doing things digitally in a way that they were not designed to use. And also with digital, you can design down to the last pixel. That's what I find really interesting about it. You can like really zoom in far, and that just goes back to what I said about details. And I think that is one of the positive things about digital work. So for this, these couple of next experiments, what I did is these are broken down actually further than this, but I had merged a Photoshop layer so I couldn't pull them out. But these are actually all digitally created assets that started off as a square, and they were just repeated. And that's what I was saying about digital tools doing things that you can't physically do by human hand. It would take me, I probably could do this by hand, it would take me probably a year to do it because there was probably 2,000 different layers when it was all said and done. So these started off as just a square, and they were just cut and manipulated and layered and layered and layered and layered on top of each other. And these were the results. So again, these started off as just a simple black square. They were cut, manipulated, copied, pasted, layered, layered, layered on top of each other. I call it recursion because it's a reoccurring theme throughout. But as you can see, it starts to do things that are really interesting and reminds me a lot of architecture. I wouldn't necessarily call this architecture, but I think it's rooted in that sense. And again, this is the same thing. These are all made with the same elements. It's honestly a matter of chance the way these things happen. It's just where they were cut, where they were copied, where they were pasted. So again, same thing, just doing these things, because I don't think this is possible by hand. I mean, you could draw it, I guess, but to get that depth in there, probably not possible by hand unless you had something to look at. Of course, something similar with graphite or something, but I think it's really interesting, the results I got from these. This is just with a little bit of added color. This is more leaning into that architecture. I was like, what would this look like if I tried to just design a building, a section of a building with this mindset? And I added a few graphics into these, granted, but this is, again, all the same square, starting with just that little simple black square, all these different results. This is not that. I think I added this by accident, but still architecture based. So going off that same notion, I was like, what else could we do in the digital world? Something that is available to me as a tool, but really isn't meant for that purpose. So I was like, what would happen if I just screen recorded different processes? And again, that's what I really like to show in my work, is how I got to that point. I like to give little clues and hints here and there of how the process works and the foundation for the work itself, and having that displayed graphically in the work somehow. So how could I show all that in a way that the digital tool was not intended? So these are all just screen grabs of different screen recordings I did of me like working on Photoshop, doing different things. And these are kind of some of the results, again, just layered and copied over each other. So you might ask yourself, how are you getting clients? How are you making a living doing this? Well, actually, people have reached out. Once I posted these on Instagram, had been reached out by several different studios asking me to kind of replicate this. So again, it goes back to that personal process of me just creating. I had no other intention except to just create and see what I could do for my own personal satisfaction, basically, and it resonates with people. That's what is great about it. Your own personal fingerprint resonates with other people, and they see what you see in a different way, and they want that. So this is some of the work that I did for a different design studio based off that concept with their logo. And I believe this was featured on their landing page of their website, if I'm not mistaken. So that brings us into digital. So we've looked at analog and we've looked at digital. After working with both these mediums for years, I realized that kind of the sweet spot of those two things are when you combine them both. Because we live, where we're at today in the world, we're really rapidly advancing with technology, and a lot of the analog stuff is just being left behind or forgotten. So I really don't want that analog stuff to be forgotten, because I think it's super important and it should never be forgotten. It should be preserved and live through the work, but we obviously shouldn't just, forget that we're advancing, and we should still keep the digital work. So the combination of analog practices and digital tools to create a new language designed to feel human in an increasingly digital landscape. So like I said, we're here. I think we really, in the last 10 years, have really moved far right, and I think you see it now with a lot of different things. Like thrifting has had a huge resurgence. I know probably a lot of you guys thrift. When I was a kid, like poor people thrifted. But now it's like a trend, because people want to go back to those old things, those well-made things, those well-crafted things, and that's what we're losing in the digital world, is we're losing that craft because we're missing that human fingerprint on things because everything's so flat in the digital world. So I think bringing it back to the middle, where we can combine those analog practices with the digital world is really important. So what if we're living through a digital renaissance, not defined by new tools, but by our hunger to reconnect with what feels human? And technology is a design language that helps us communicate in new ways.
I don't say please, I don't say thank you. I just do what I want, and if you want to with me, you better have what I want. I don't say please, I don't say thank you. I just do what I want, and if you want to with me, you better have what I want. I don't say please, I don't say thank you. I just do what I want, and if you want to with me, you better have what I want. I don't say please, I don't say thank you. I just do what I want, and if you want to with me, you better have what I want.
So you can see in that process video, it's a combination of a lot of different things. Analog from the book, different design languages through coding, text. I use AI in that. I use scans from books. So kind of a combination of all those things. And that's what I've really started to bring into the work. And this is where my style has started to develop through all that iteration of digital work, through analog work. It started to collide into this style that I'm known for today, and why I get hired for my work through Instagram is because of this collision of the style of analog and digital, and that is how I've developed my fingerprint. So again, I take all these text elements from different programs like Photoshop, and I put them into my designs, into my work, and that is one design language. And then you have the regular design language, English or typography. That's, to me, is just the vehicle for these other explorations, though. So again, going off that thing, showing those details, showing those different elements that were forever and constantly being exposed to more and more and more, those digital elements, exposing the grid, showing how those things work in a stagnant way, because it's just a still image, but I really, again, emphasize how I got to that point. So I could have left, the blue text box out where it's getting dragged and just left the skewed text in, but that wouldn't really show the process. So I really like to show in a highly detailed, refined way of how I got to that point. So this is some more work. This was actually, I believe the angel was a AI image. So again, I'm not opposed to using tools, digital tools, but it's just in a way that can be related to back to the human touch. So I believe I AI'd this and then printed it out, scribbled over it. Whoops. Printed it out, scribbled it over it, put it in Photoshop, and added all these elements. So this one is just straight Photoshop, lots and lots and lots and lots of layers. So I've also tried to develop a style where I can, since I've done so many things by hand, through analog, I've built up this library of textures, and I know how those elements react. I know what things look like, what looks best, and so I've also tried to develop into my style, because you're not always going to have a full studio, like I said, of all these different analog materials and resources. So it's also good to know how to do things purely digital that goes back to your style and back to your fingerprint. So this was done fully, 100% Photoshop. Again, just some more work, bringing out those elements. So this is a really important one to me because I don't know if any of you know how to code, but kind of embedding that coding language into nature, because those are like polar opposites. It's like, nature is analog and the digital coding is purely digital. So how can we embed those two things in an image to bring them together in cohesiveness? And again, taking a classical painting, the girl with the pearl earrings, breaking that up, using those different text elements, those different Photoshop elements, and those digital elements to really tell a story of how I got here in new and exciting ways. So this was part of I don't know if any of you have heard of 36 Days of Type. It's a challenge on Instagram they do every year. I would encourage any of you to do it because I experienced really powerful growth during that 36 days where you start with ABCs and you work through that and then the numbers. For 36 days you post and they curate it and they pick some of their favorites and post on their page, but it's a really great challenge with other artists and designers on Instagram where you can see other people's work and everyone is starting with the same thing. You're starting with the letter A. Everyone has the same base material, but everyone is running through that their own personal fingerprint, and it's so exciting, and I'm always excited that time of year to see how that one thing is just displayed so differently through everyone's creative work. And to get some of these textures are just, it's, again, thinking outside the box. A lot of these textures on this are just me taking out my iPhone, taking a picture of a blank white screen on my computer, and it has those pixels in there, and you would never, really think to do that, and then that became a really unique texture. And you should try it on your free time. Just get a white screen on your laptop and take a bunch of pictures, close, far. It has some really unique results because it's different every time. The pixels get bigger, more spread out. And these all were just, again, a way to explore how I can combine that analog and digital. And I think this one is one of the more powerful ones because it really obviously shows the yin and yang of that. So these are some animations I did with those. So all the animations on these are actually filmed off like a old school video game TV. So I actually took the 7, ran it through an HDMI converter onto a CRT TV, filmed that because it becomes super pixelated, and that's where these animation portions of these come from. So it's still digital, but in a more analog sense because it's an analog TV. So that was all personal work. Let me show you some professional work, I guess. This was a NFT project that I worked on with Monotype and Helvetica with 20 other graphic designers and artists. It was displayed in 2022 in New York near Times Square. That's the actual photograph of the project. I was surprised enough that my work was featured on It's Nice That, the website, creative website on the front cover. I think that my images were actually displayed twice. But basically, they released a new version of Helvetica Now, and so they curated these artists, and kind of the same thing as the 36 Days of Type. They just wanted them to start with a basic typography as the base layer and go through their different filters and use the typography to their style. So this one I really tried to get like that grittiness of New York, and that's what I was saying. I really like to use typography as a vehicle. You can just write NY, but I really like that the typography is a vehicle for the expression. So just adding these textures and the layers, the work becomes a lot more interesting, and just makes you want to look at it longer. And it also tells a story about New York in a way that it's advanced with the pixels, and it's also grungy and smoky and dirty. And again, that was a strictly analog piece. So this is a project I did with Armada Skis. They're a downhill snow ski company. This is actually based off those personal projects, again, where a personal project turned into a professional project where I took those squares and manipulated them and layered them and textured them. The owner of Armada saw that on my Instagram, contacted me, and I ended up making these ski designs for him, and I did all the branding, the packaging. And I wanted to show this especially because it shows, at the very beginning of my presentation, I had those sketches from architecture school, and it shows that kind of never leaves. You always have that in your back pocket if you need it through that. And I think that's where all great design and art starts, is by hand in the sketchbook, not on Pinterest, not anywhere else in the digital world. It starts in your brain and on the pen and paper. So that's where this project starts as well. That's where most of my professional projects at least start. This was the final result of that. So you can see, I wish I put the first iterations on here because they were a lot more crazy, but as you'll find out when you work with clients, they sometimes don't want the craziness. They want it a little bit toned back. So this was the result of that through that just for fun project that I did where I was repeating the squares. And I think these are not even released yet. I have an NDA, so no one take a picture of these, please. So after I've done all this stuff in the computer, I thought, well, what's a way that, I've combined digital with analog in the computer. That's easy because you can get analog work into the digital world pretty easily. But how can we take the digital world and in an art form, put it in the physical world? So this was a commission I did for a music venue in California called Visceral. They do like house music DJ events, and every month they commission me to do a piece of art for them. So the idea was this is to create a canvas where I'm painting and drawing on it and add these wires, these different elements that are reminiscent of tech house or house music, because obviously it's electronic music. So right now this is just where it's at. The wires are obviously not connected to anything. What I'm working on currently in my current projects are to add little screens and do some coding to actually have these electronics work and make sounds, have speakers on there, and bring, again, that technology into the physical world. So again, we are here. I believe before this said analog and digital. I have now concluded that it's artist, creator, and then designer. We're at a place where even as designers, and this is a huge debate, I don't want to get into all the debates about that, but I believe that even as designers, before we're designers, we have to be creators. We have to find our fingerprint through the creation process. And to me, design is kind of the end result. It's how we communicate. Very important, obviously, but it's how we communicate what we create. It's not what we create. So again, try to break it down even further. An artist, creator focuses on self-expression and exploration. The goal is to create something meaningful, evocative, or personal. Often without constraints, the process is exploratory, experimental, and open-ended. A designer focuses on communication and problem solving. The goal is to convey a specific message or achieve a practical purpose, often for an audience. Designers shape, refine, and edit their work to be clear, functional, and intentional. So going back to this, your fingerprint is that invisible thread running through all your work. It's a sum of your choices, your influences, your experiences. It's what makes your work yours. So that's your style. You, by definition, are artwork through your experiences. And I'll just leave you with this. Virgil Abloh says, design is how we edit the message to communicate the idea, not the creation of the thing itself. So if Virgil says it, it's probably relative. So art is our soul, raw, tactile, and unrestrained. We are analog by nature. Design is our voice, layered, refined, and used to communicate. A lot like digital, a lot like a tool. So design, to me, is a tool to communicate. True human connection emerges where they meet, where expression becomes understanding and creation becomes something others can feel. Thank you. we good on time to do a few questions? Does anybody have any questions? When I first started, when I was doing the 36 days stuff, or when I was doing one every day, obviously I was working and stuff, so maybe a few hours, but I mean, some of them, it just depends really on the complexity of it. Usually maybe like 4 hours, sometimes days, but usually they involve like, I don't know how many layers, like 1,000 layers maybe in Photoshop. And I know y'all are all coming into the school now, and I'm not sure even if you're that familiar with Photoshop or not, but 1,000 layers is a lot. I definitely paid a lot of money for my laptop to be able to have Photoshop not crash on me all the time.
And I have a loaded question.
What's up?
I mean, I love the way you talk about kind of program hacking or tool hacking, of using things in ways that they're not meant to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Who asked you to do these things?
I mean, no one asked me to do any of this stuff. No one's gonna ask you to do any of this stuff, probably. It's a hard lesson to learn, but you know, no one asked you to go out and explore these things. Your professor's probably not gonna, you know, they will guide you. That's the great thing about professors and friends and colleagues. They'll guide you, but really it's up to you and your fingerprint to explore the things you're interested in. And why I did that, I was just interested in it. I may have seen something that influenced that decision to go down that path, but you know, just out of curiosity. But usually I found that when you go down that path of curiosity and try something new, you have no clue what you're doing and explore that path, good things usually happen from it. And you either learn a great lesson, you discover something you would have never learned, or in some of the cases that I showed you, you get work, you get paid. I think I saw another hand over there.
Yeah, I find your work very interesting, but I wanted to know if you had an interest in graphic design before you entered architecture, and how the process of design kind of solidified that, or if you found that through the program?
Yeah, good question. So I think I've been, you know, my whole life been creatively inclined. I've always just loved to create and get my hands dirty. I wasn't really even kind of aware of graphic design as a profession per se before I came to Virginia Tech. I just knew that I wanted to do architecture school because I believe that it's probably, you know, just a better program to learn design in general. And I think through architecture, and I think somewhere around like 4th year, and when I learned Photoshop is probably when I really started getting interested in graphics, and I thought, well, I would be spending more time like photoshopping stuff than I would, you know, focusing on architecture as a practice, I guess. But I think that's architecture is the foundation for what I do today. And like I said at the beginning of my talk, if I could go back and go to architecture school again and still do graphic design afterwards, I would do that 10 times. Because I'm just telling you, you're in a great program and you really need to, you know, use those resources that you have at your advantage.
Thank you, Ben.
Wait, I got one, Chris. I have a challenge or like a
Okay.
potentially to maybe share your thoughts, because as you were describing the kind of role of the nuance in the hand and like the patina,
Mm-hmm.
and this question of the fingerprint, it made me think like, well, there's some unique characteristics or qualities that emerge in AI technology that is like an emergent aesthetic that might imply that fingerprint in technology. So I wonder if maybe you could speak to that or speculate on that, because I think I'd maybe argue like, you know, 4 fingers is like a style or like a fingerprint that the AI has, or not knowing how to tell time. So there are some emergent properties to AI that might look like some of these questions of soul that I wonder if it could, you know, if you could speak to whether or not that could challenge the concept, or what you think about that?
Yeah, my whole thing with AI, at least right now, obviously it's going to advance, so we don't really know, can't see the future. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. But I think what AI lacks right now is just the process of how you get from point A to point B. It's a straight line and not a zigzag.
It looks like a straight line.
It does look like a straight line. I understand that. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the question, I guess?
It looks like a straight line, but how that straight line is achieved is potentially, and the resultant of maybe like 4 fingers or like the time being wrong. I would almost say, like, is that not sort of similar to like a mistake or like an incident that the hand would make? And that's an example of the AI having a piece of soul.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I don't know if, I don't really know how to answer that question, other than I think that the human, just the way I look at things, the human soul is you can't replicate it. So even if it is making those mistakes and through that's, you know, AI is a great tool and it's going to continue to get greater, and it's obviously our job as artists and creatives and designers to understand how that technology works as an emerging field, because if we don't understand how it works, other people are going to come in and understand how it works. And those are going to be the people that are going to take our jobs. It's probably not AI, it's probably the people that understand AI. So I think understanding how that works is a really important asset for us as creatives. And maybe that's the answer to your question. Maybe if I knew a little bit more about the line that goes from point A to point B, I could speak to that more, but I just don't. So I can't really speak to that exactly, but maybe that's something I should explore is that process through the coding and through what have you of how AI gets to that point. Because I think that's, you know, with humans that's the case. So I'm sure it's the case with AI too. So that's an interesting proposition.
Yeah, it's just a thought of like where the discourse that I think is really interesting with analog and digital is like your question of like where your work is going now. I wonder if like there is some emerging properties that you're identifying in analog that are, I think, emerging in the digital, and that might, you know, be a pathway to post-digital exploration.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
How did you get into the design and coding? More like the coding aspect of it?
Like the coding,
Yeah.
I guess just using, for me, it was just a question of the coding as a language, as a way to communicate, and I wanted to represent that in a different way visually, I guess, in combination with the analog.
Ben, at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned the importance of the design process.
Mm-hmm.
So, if it's possible for you to describe the connection between your brain and your soul using analog or digital. And I'm going to explain an example that maybe you understand.
Mm-hmm.
You're a surfer,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mhm.
So we have a connection between the body and our soul because we're having a feeling
Mm-hmm.
and we are with an external element that is moving and changing, that is the wave. For all this, we have a connection that it could be a little bit, I mean, just a surfer can describe that sensation or that emotion or that connection. But in my opinion, when I use an owl, my brain is working in a different way and it's having a different connection with my soul depending which tool, an owl tool I use, or even if I use a digital tool like Photoshop or Rhinoceros, etc. So my connection is different. Is it possible for you to describe this connection or not? In terms of the design process.
Well, I think that just goes back to having that connection. That's a good question, because I think that connection is like that for me sometimes, where it feels really disconnected, where I feel really disconnected from the work and I feel like I make crap work. And usually when that happens, I will just put the work down, leave it alone, and go have those experiences that are completely unrelated to that, whether it's traveling. Surfing is a really big one for me because you have that connection to the mind, body, soul. You know, the water is coming from the earth. You're being powered by Mother Nature, basically. And I don't know what that is, but that, for me, renourishes that connection between my mind and the analog when I'm feeling like it's disconnected, is going out there and having other experiences and getting that fresh perspective on life. And it doesn't have to be surfing. It could be going to a show, to see some music, to go on a run, just go walk, touch some grass, go outside, like put your phone down. I think that connection, there's no science. I mean, there probably is science behind it, but it's kind of like a spiritual practice that comes back into the work without explanation, I guess. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, I just want
Yeah, for sure.
the perception, the perspective about that.
Yeah, and that's why I put that at the beginning. It's just like, I feel like you need to have those experiences to make good work that you're happy with, to have that connection with the work, because it comes from inside your soul. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, guys.